You reach a point in life where the tiredness is no longer just in your body. It settles deeper. It moves into your voice, your shoulders, the way you sit at the kitchen table long after the dishes have dried. You know this feeling. The ache that comes from being the one everyone turns to, the one who listens, the one who steadies the room. And you do it because you care, because you've always cared. But somewhere along the way, caring became something heavier than love. It became a duty you never agreed to, a quiet weight you learned to carry without question. There's a particular hour of the night when this weight is most visible. The phone buzzes, the message appears, and you already know what it will cost you. You sit in the glow of that little screen, reading someone else's crisis, someone else's confusion, and something in you responds like it always has, automatic, responsible, available. Even when your eyes burn, even when your breath tightens, even when a part of you whispers that you are slipping away from yourself. You type the comforting words. You absorb the panic. You hold the line until the other person feels steadier. Then the silence drops, and you're left with the hollow echo of your own exhaustion. It's strange how invisible overgiving becomes. You don't notice yourself bending until you're nearly folded in half. You don't recognize how often you explain, justify, soften your edges just to keep the peace. Not because anyone asked you directly, but because you learned, somewhere in childhood or somewhere in love, that your worth was measured in how well you could hold everything together. And so you hold. You hold conversations that drain you. You hold the moods of people who never ask how you're doing. You hold the fragile stories others hand you as if they were sacred texts. And after a while, you forget what it feels like to set something down. There is a door in every life that closes slowly, not with a slam, but with the faint sound of a room dimming at dusk. You don't notice the light fading until your eyes begin to strain. You don't notice the room narrowing until you feel pressed against the edges. And one evening, perhaps in the quiet of your living room, or while washing a single mug in the sink, you feel it fully. The simple, piercing truth that you have been carrying too much. And the softest part of you finally wants to rest. There's a reason you give so much, and it's not the simple generosity people see on the surface. It lives deeper, in the quiet corners you rarely speak of. We grow up believing that kindness is the safest way to exist in the world, that if we stay helpful, agreeable, endlessly available, we won't be pushed out of anyone's heart. Somewhere along the line, you learned that love could be withdrawn, that presence could be conditional, and so you tried to become indispensable, not out of vanity, but out of fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being unnecessary, fear of what might remain if you ever stopped holding everything up. You know this fear. It moves like a shadow behind every "sure I can help," even when you're exhausted. It sits with you on those evenings when someone calls, and you answer before you've decided whether you want to. You listen as they talk, and you nod along, offering comfort they barely notice. And when the call ends, you stare at the blank screen, half hoping someone will finally ask how you are, half terrified they might. There's a small moment that returns to you sometimes. You're standing in your childhood home, watching an adult, maybe a parent, maybe someone else, fall apart without naming it. They say, "I'm fine," in that practiced tone that fools strangers, but not you. You step in, even as a child. You carry what isn't yours, because no one else will. And so the pattern begins. You learn to fix things before they break. You smooth every rough edge. You anticipate everyone's needs until your own become indistinct, like a faded photograph left too long in the sun. And then there are the little scenes from adulthood, the ones you rarely admit out loud. The time you drove across town late at night to soothe someone who wasn't actually in danger, just lonely. The morning you rewrote an entire email for a colleague who thanked you once and forgot twice. The afternoon you rearranged your plans because someone else's crisis felt more urgent than your peace. The strange, lingering guilt you felt afterward, as if resting meant abandoning your post. We tell ourselves this is goodness. We whisper that the world needs people like us, the steady ones, the reliable ones, the ones who will show up no matter the cost. But beneath that belief is a quieter truth, an unspoken bargain you never meant to make. If you give enough, maybe you will finally feel wanted. If you sacrifice enough, maybe you won't be left behind. But self-erasure is a poor substitute for love, and a heart cannot stay full by pouring itself out. There comes a moment when something inside you finally flickers awake. Not loudly, not with drama. More like a thin line of morning light slipping under a closed door. You're going about your day, doing what you always do, solving, soothing, absorbing, when a simple truth brushes against you, almost tenderly. This kindness you're so proud of has been slowly wearing you down. At first, you resist the thought. It feels disloyal, ungrateful. You've built your whole sense of goodness on being the one who shows up, the one who never turns away. But the thought returns, steady and patient, the way water returns to a shoreline it has claimed for years, and you begin to see what you couldn't see before. Helping everyone has cost you pieces of yourself. You didn't notice the erosion at first. A missed meal, a lost evening, a breath held too long while someone else's story pressed against your chest. You told yourself it was nothing, just small sacrifices. But small sacrifices accumulate, and one day you feel the thinness of your own presence, as if you've become a faded version of the person you meant to be. There's an old truth hidden in plain sight. Every virtue becomes a burden when it outgrows its own edges. Even generosity, even tenderness. A river without banks is not freedom, it's a flood. And a life without boundaries is not love, it's disappearance. You remember moments when your hands trembled after helping someone who didn't notice the cost. You remember stepping into your own home and feeling like a guest, as if the rooms belonged more to the obligations you carried than to the quiet person you were before everyone needed you. You remember waking in the night with a sadness you couldn't name, an awareness that you had become the caretaker of every life but your own. And still, there is no anger in this seeing, only clarity, a steady, almost gentle understanding that kindness without shape is not virtue. It is self-erasure. You were never meant to be the ground everyone walks on. You were meant to be a person with a center, a pulse, a life that breathes. The sadness that rises now is soft, not sharp. The relief that follows is quieter still. Together they form a new kind of honesty, one that feels like opening a window in a long closed room. You cannot save yourself by disappearing. There comes a day when you don't announce anything. You don't make a speech. You don't gather the courage to confront anyone. You don't craft the perfect explanation that might finally make people understand. You simply grow quiet. A quiet that feels different from fatigue. A quiet that holds its own shape. You begin to notice the subtle moment before you answer a request. The pulse that slows. The breath that hesitates. The small voice, deep and steady, that says not today. And instead of overriding it, instead of rushing to soften the moment with apology, you let the pause stand. You let silence do what words never could. You stop explaining yourself, not out of coldness, but out of recognition. You finally see that explanation is its own kind of labor, one that always bends you towards someone else's comfort. You've spent years smoothing your tone, cushioning your refusals, trying to make your needs sound reasonable enough to be accepted. And now, something in you simply refuses to negotiate for the right to rest. A boundary, you realize, is not a wall. It's a threshold. A doorway you choose to stand in, deciding what enters and what stays outside. And in this new season of your life, you close the door gently. You silence the buzzing phone on the counter. You let messages wait. You let the world move without you for a while. You feel the air shift as you step back into yourself. There is dignity in this withdrawal. Not the dramatic kind, not the triumphant kind, just a plain, grounded dignity. The kind that comes from recognizing that your energy is finite, that your presence is not an endless resource, that peace is something you're allowed to keep. You begin to understand that saying nothing can be the purest form of truth, because silence carries no performance. Silence asks nothing. Silence returns you to yourself. People may wonder why you've become distant. Some will reach for you, not out of malice but out of habit. You don't push them away. You simply don't step forward. Your absence becomes a quiet act of love, not for them, but for the part of you that has waited years to be chosen. And slowly, the noise falls away. The demands dissolve. The room grows wider. The wind moves through the curtains. The evening settles around you like a long-forgotten blessing. Somewhere in the house, the world finally hushes. There is a tenderness in your silence that you didn't notice at first. It wasn't the silence of withdrawal or punishment. It wasn't the silence of someone slamming a door. It felt more like a house at dawn, a stillness that holds warmth, a quiet that protects what is fragile and growing. You begin to understand that stepping back is not the opposite of love. Sometimes it is the purest form of it. You picture your life as a home with many rooms. For years, the doors stood wide open. People wandered in without knocking. They brought their storms, their noise, their hurried footsteps. And you welcomed them, believing this was what kindness meant. But over time, the rooms grew cluttered with other people's worries. The air felt heavy with their unspoken needs. And somewhere in that crowded house, you lost the small corner that belonged only to you. Now, with each quiet boundary, you begin clearing space. You dust off the forgotten shelves. You open a single window and let the light fall across the floor. Your silence becomes a way of tending to the home you carry inside, sweeping out the noise, softening the shadows, letting the air move freely again. It is not abandonment. It is care. And something unexpected happens. When you stop rushing toward every voice, when you stop trying to interpret every sigh and soothe every sorrow, the house begins to breathe. The walls no longer lean inward. The rooms regain their shape. You walk through them slowly, touching the edges, feeling the difference. This place, once overrun, begins to feel sacred again. You realize that love is not measured by how much of yourself you give away, but by how honestly you remain present. And presence requires space. Presence requires air. Presence requires the simple, unhurried rhythm of being with yourself without interruption. Silence becomes your lantern, steady, gentle, guiding you back to what is real. It casts no harsh shadows. It doesn't blind or burn. It simply glows, making the path visible enough to trust your own steps again. People may not understand this new quiet. They may think you've pulled away. But you know the truth. You haven't withdrawn from love. You've withdrawn from noise. You haven't closed the door on them. You've opened the door to yourself. And in that soft opening, something in you finally settles. Distance can be the most faithful form of care. There is a moment, usually an unremarkable one, when you realize you no longer owe anyone the version of yourself that never rested. It doesn't arrive with triumph or defiance. It arrives the way evening settles, softly, without asking permission, without needing to be named. You feel it in your shoulders first, in the way they drop when no one is watching. You feel it in your breath, deeper now, less hurried. You feel it in the simple calm of not explaining why you're choosing peace. You've spent much of your life trying to manage the expectations of others, trying to soften their fears, trying to make yourself small enough to slip into the spaces they left open. But now, as you stand in the quiet threshold of your own choosing, something loosens. The old guilt rises out of habit, then passes. The old need to justify yourself flares up, then dissolves before it forms words. You begin to see how much of your life was spent narrating your choices to people who were never listening, offering reasons to those who preferred you pliant, apologizing for needs that were not excessive, only unspoken. And now, after all the bending and explaining and trying to be understood, you discover the gentlest truth. Peace needs no audience. You find yourself returning to smaller things, an empty chair by the window, the sound of your own footsteps in the hall, the warmth of a cup held in both hands. These quiet rituals used to feel like loneliness. Now they feel like homecoming. They remind you that not every moment must be shared, not every thought must be translated, not every feeling must be made palatable for someone else. You are allowed to end the conversation without a speech. You are allowed to leave the room without offering a reason. You are allowed to be a person whose life is no longer shaped by the needs of the loudest voice. There is no bitterness in this, no edge, just release. A release that feels like setting down a bag you've carried for far too long, so long you forgot there was another way to stand. You step back from the weight, and the space around you opens, wide and quiet, and yours. And in that spaciousness, you understand something simple and freeing. You do not have to explain your peace to anyone. You are finally choosing the life that has been waiting for you.